Welcome, everyone. I'm Taney Roniger, and this is episode 3 of Why It Matters. Today I'm going to be talking with Paul Myoda about the subject of abstraction in art and why our students who are new to it often feel mystified by it. Think it's completely opaque. Some are, horrified by it. They don't want anything to do with it. There's a lot of fear around abstraction, and also just plain dislike. Some of them just really resist it. They think that has nothing to offer them. This is, I think, a sentiment that is reflected in the general public to some degree. People who don't have a background in art, they think of abstraction. Works that are illustrative are sort of easy, you're looking at a scene or whatever. Works that are abstract, they feel like it's just like a closed society to them. So we're here to try to illuminate it a bit and make it less daunting to people. I'm going to suggest that I think the problem is that the assumptions that we've inherited, the general assumptions about it, are actually incorrect. So we'll talk a bit about that during our talks. Let me just read Paul's bio. I'll start with that. Paul Myoda is a sculptor based in Rhode Island. He holds a BFA from RISD, that's the Rhode Island School of Design, and an MFA from Yale. Myoda's recent work, Polyperspectives, is a series of illuminating sculptures that explore the incompatibilities between linear perspective as developed in the European Renaissance, isometric perspective as developed in East Asia, and four-dimensional space as developed in mathematics. Sounds fascinating. He is an associate professor in the Department of Visual Art at Brown University, where he has been teaching since 2006. His sculpture courses often integrate traditional metal and woodworking techniques with digital fabrication technologies. He also teaches a drawing studio that focuses on hand drawing with traditional dry media and introduces select digital drawing applications. So, Paul, it's wonderful to have you here. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, no, good to see you. I'm happy you're doing this.
Yes. So Paul and I are both going to be sharing a little bit about how we introduce the subject to our students. We each have a little slide presentation to show. And then, we will stop sharing screens, come back, talk a little bit, and then at the very end, we're going to show some of our own work because both of us are, in fact, abstract artists. Would you call yourself that? An abstract artist?
Sure, for lack of a better term. Although maybe I wouldn't, for the reasons that you just mentioned. I don't want to immediately put people off. So.
Right, there you go. Okay, but we do make abstract work.
Correct.
So Paul's going to share first, but before you do that, Paul, I thought I would, I'm a big fan these days of going to Google and asking a really general question because what they give you is what everybody is saying, right? So this is sort of like an average of what everybody's saying. So I put in why do people tend to dislike abstract art? All right. Some interesting things came up. I would definitely add to them. Number one, lack of representational subject matter. Obviously, people are looking for a story, a person, a landscape, things, right? There's the old, my kid could do that perception. It looks too easy. They don't see the skill or the talent involved in abstract art. And I would add that when it's selling for millions of dollars, this can really offend people. Like, God, I should do that. These people. Demand for intellectual effort. This one is funny to me. Abstract art often requires the viewer to invest time and emotional energy to interpret it. Wow. But my response is, why do you have to interpret it? Why, a lot of it is, they're trying to figure out what the artist is trying to say or what the artist's message is. I say, forget the artist. Preference for realism. They don't like things that seem arbitrary or random. A lot of my students will say, well, how can you tell if one piece is better than another? It's all just like anything goes, right? And then many expect art to be purely decorative or illustrative. I'm going to add, many people consider abstract art to be elitist, right? They feel like you have to have a fancy education to understand it. People feel stupid in front of it. Often defies language. That's a big one. People feel like they have to say something about it, something intelligent. And often it defies language. There are no words, and that's uncomfortable. People are inherently dislike uncertainty, confusion, and the feeling of being lost at sea. And that's totally normal.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So let's see if we can assuage some of those, or just sort of let's alter some of those assumptions, right? So why don't you start us
Right.
off?
Okay.
Or do you want
Yeah.
to add? Do you have anything to add to that? Reasons?
Or I was just thinking that if you took that as a neutral description, a lot of those, like outside of value, are describing what's good about abstract art, like the idea of it being outside of language and outside of words,
Yeah.
as an example. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe we can get it so it answers in different ways in the near future. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's part of its point. It's
yeah,
discursive silence, but people are so uncomfortable with that. And my big thing is it's okay not to say anything. I tell
right,
people
right,
you don't have to say anything. You don't have to be anxious about trying to come up with the right words. You just look, right?
right.
So, all right, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so I put together sort of a collage of some different presentations that I give because principally I do teach sculpture, and that's traditional media and a lot of new digital technologies and sort of how they're informing traditional media. And then, as you mentioned, the drawing. So in each of those sort of sets of classes, I often talk about abstraction relative to different forms. Okay, so maybe that's my first point. Is I believe there are a lot of different types of abstraction.
Yep.
But I'm going to then share my screen right now and go through some of these different ways that I've framed abstraction. So if I could share my screen right now.
Terrific.
Okay, so often in my drawing class, that's one of the first projects that we have is to do some type of drawing that's abstract. And I always begin with this little example. It's that film Ratatouille, where if you all recall, and I think there'll be a link below,
Yes.
the little chef is a great chef because he has this phenomena of synesthesia. And that synesthesia, and we go on to define that, has to do with these sort of misfires in our neurological system. And I don't think it's unhealthy. I don't think it's sort of a disease. Maybe 4 or 5% of the population has some form of synesthesia. But the idea is that somehow the input in one sensory sort of organ misfires and triggers sort of other sensory perceptions. So you may look at numbers and see different colors, or you may hear sounds and sort of imagine seeing different spaces or different shapes. So in the little chef example, he's eating some food and he's trying to explain this to some of the other rats. And this kind of explosion of shape and form and color happens as he's eating. And it's just such a clear example of how one thing can translate. And again, when we mentioned this idea of outside of words, it's absolutely translating outside of words because he's not describing what it tastes like. He's
Mm.
sort of feeling what it tastes like in his sensory organs of smell and taste. And then this sort of visual thing happens, right? So even if you're not a synesthete, I think I sort of emphasize you can tap into this and in a sense kind of recreate it, or at least try to say, what would it be like? What if I looked at this sort of image and I tried to imagine what it would sound like? So the first example I'm going to give is the Vasily Kandinsky. So he was a famous sort of synesthete. And I believe when he heard music, he would see colors and shapes. So he actually tried to codify this, I believe, by saying, kind of coming up with his own peculiar personal language of form and color. So he would listen to music, and then he would, make these different paintings, compositions. And that becomes my first prompt for this drawing class. I say, pick 3 different songs, get 3 pieces of paper, listen to the songs, and in some way do drawings that are non-representational and just try to translate it. So translate that sound into this visual form. And often people have to try it a couple different times because maybe they accidentally draw some, say, symbols or icons, or if they're hearing the lyrics, they're sort of drawing some, I don't know, beach scene or a cloud, right?
Yeah.
But then if you just kind of, insist, you're not representing things as we see them. You're somehow trying to translate it in a different way into form, texture, tone. They kind of start getting it. And anyway, it's fun because they do these 3 drawings, we put them up, and we try to identify not necessarily the exact song, but the genre of music. And often it's pretty close. Like if it's, I don't know, electronic dance music versus country versus, opera, right? You can kind of see it, right?
I bet. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
So that's the first way I kind of like enter into it, right? And now here's another way I sort of enter into abstraction, and often I do this in sculpture assignments. So here's sort of a mini history sort of block. I'm not going to talk about specific politics. I'm going to talk about general politics. And I'm talking about basically what happened in Russia during the Russian Revolution. So it's this famous sort of group now. Sometimes they're called the futurists, sometimes supremacists, but it's about 100 years ago. And the prompt that I have is, this happened 100 years ago, it stopped, but can we kind of imagine doing something like this now and kind of picking it up again? So the long and short of it, and again, outside of this specific politics, is that the Tsar, and this is the Tsar, was deposed for a different communist utopian system. But a lot of artists were very involved with trying to come up with sort of a new language, a new visual language that would sort of embody this kind of revolution. So they did not want representation. So here is an example of one of their posters, which basically is like, join the revolution, join the sort of Workers' Party. But the way that this form came about, and I'm going to show some examples of that, is, and again, in brief, I think industrialization and modernization was happening sort of slowly in England and France and the United States and many countries. In Russia, it happened very quickly. So it was this really quick sort of displacement from agrarian to industrial economies and this huge kind of population shift, and then this tremendous surge in sort of industry. So it just happened so quickly that this becomes almost like a case study in the kind of people's different perceptions. So this is an example of what's happening after this revolution takes place and these people are participating, and they're saying, let us try to make an art that sort of matches this energy and somehow matches what we're seeing around us, this industry, these new forms, these new kind of materials and construction techniques. And it's again, it's very much about the city. It's very much about technology, modernization. So
I have a question. I have a question for you. Why didn't they want to work representationally? Why didn't they just, do what had been done before, is paint scenes of the revolution or something?
Right. I mean, maybe there's a few different reasons because there's a lot of different sort of artists involved, but partially it was sort of a wiping clean. And there's sort of an odd facet to this, which is both a kind of material one where people are very insistent upon, like, all right, this new technology, this new kind of understanding of how we can be in the world is going to change sort of our culture. But then there's also this spiritual component.
Mm.
So that spiritual component is very much also like embedded in this too. And I think that's why there's a lot of these abstract forms and these non-representational things is because they're trying to get to that place. So I like to show this because I think it's a great example of sort of art as exploration from kind of floor to ceiling. But then it's this one. And I think this one, it's the black square. Maybe he's the first one to do the black square. But it becomes very easy to kind of make fun of modern art. It becomes very easy to say, like, what the heck is going on here?
Exactly.
It's a black painting, right? But I think you have to see this one painting in this context because he's really, and again, he and a few other people, they're trying to find a form, a visual language that can kind of match this utopian aspiration, this kind of energy that they see around them. And they want it to be universal. They really are aspiring to get this out so everyone can understand it. But, often now it gets kind of reduced to like, that's ridiculous, a black square. But
I could
again,
do that. Yeah.
it's just part.
Yeah.
Here's someone recreated it using the colors. But again, it's one way also I want to emphasize about this is it's very experimental. Like they're trying to basically like, write a new language and have other people sort of read it. So it's very experimental. And in that context, you have these artists. So here's El Lissitzky. He was trained sort of as engineer, as architect. He fully bought in and trying to, again, make this kind of language. And it's the language of abstraction. And it's, again, responsive to what they're seeing around them. And he's using really unusual sort of materials. There are a lot of these kind of industrial materials are actually in the painting, which is a lot like, or it's basically a collage also with industrial materials in it. And they're really kind of exploring like what these materials can do. I think Bertolt Brecht in another context said, it's not what we can do with like the good old things, it's what we can do with the bad new ones. Because maybe some of these materials are ugly to people, but they're saying, you know what, let's embrace them and let's see what we can do with them. So here's installation. He's getting more three-dimensional. And here's another one. This is, some of the first kind of plywood out of one piece he's making this. But again, this is one example of this abstract sculpture, but it has to be seen in this context again, where all of these things, and this is a sort of student group, Society for Young Artists, are experimenting with these new industrial materials and they're messing around to see what they can do. And they're all, what unites them all is they're non-objective. So that's another way, that's how they described abstraction.
Let's define that term. Yeah, non-objective for people.
Right. Yeah, in a way, it's a pretty useful term, maybe in some respects more useful than abstraction, because it basically means you're not representing an object, a specific object. So you could be representing a process, or you could be representing, something that's not visible, but it's not representing an object. So non-objective.
Nice.
So here's just a couple other examples. And at this point in my sculpture class, I say, all right, this is 100 years ago. People are, again, embracing new materials, trying to see what they can do, looking around them, seeing like these new forms. 100 years later, what are our kind of new materials, new conditions, and how can we respond to them? And then there's an interesting split that happens with the constructivists. And it also, I should mention, it only lasts like 20 years because of politics. They have to get out of Russia. So it's a really brief period of time where they're doing this. They're really excited, but then they have to get out. But when they're doing it, I make this other analogy between sort of I think, pure science and applied science. I think that sort of people understand it, even if we don't use those terms too much anymore. But a pure science is basically, I don't know, looking at the periodic table and saying, I'm going to figure out, what's going on with these metals and just doing experiments. You don't know where you're going to go with it. maybe you're going to make a new light bulb. I mean, you just don't know exactly where you're going to go with it. It's sort of a pure science exploration and experimentation. But then at a certain point, maybe down the hall, your colleagues in applied science are saying, hey, let's make that light bulb. Like you figured out, like this is great, whatever, conductive properties, whatever. And then they apply it. So that analogy, I think, can be used to this type of abstraction where they said, hey, we're all looking at these forms and how different our environment is. Let's engage this now and apply it. So this is a poster. And this is a famous poster in the context of politics because it becomes, in a sense, representational. The red is the sort of the radical Bolsheviks, or those are the revolutionaries, and the white are the white Russians. So this is basically saying, hey, we don't want, this old guard. And now it's become even an anti-fascist icon. But so it, in a sense, and we'll see this, I think, in other examples, abstraction in the pure sense, looking for that pure stuff, was applied, and then it becomes almost representational. But all right, so here's another example of that, those forms, and then here it becomes, a speaker podium with Lenin, and then I think this is the most clear example, but also in a sense sad, and it is the Tatlin's monument to the Third International. So, I mean, it's absolutely this fascinating monument, which is a working office. And I encourage people who aren't familiar with it to look at sort of the description, but it was never made. It was supposed to be basically like the new Capitol building. And there was a kinetic element, like the whole thing rotated, once every year, another section once every month, another section like every day. But it was this kinetic thing. And it was very much like Eiffel Tower technology, even though it's a little bit later. But again, happens slower. Or in France, they're developing this. They have the Eiffel Tower for a World's Fair. In Russia, it happened quickly. They want to basically take a lot of those technologies, other ones, and to make a new capital. So here I say, like, think about our capital. Think about other capitals of sort of Europe. I mean, ours isn't reflective of our time or necessarily our sort of environments. I mean, it's like quoting Greek columns, and there's probably some Egyptian sort of motifs in there somehow. Like it's a neoclassical thing that's sort of a quote of a quote. But this, they really were trying to make it into sort of the face, like the facade of their sort of new culture, their new state.
Yeah.
But again, it was not made, and people sort of had to get out because of Stalin. Someone made this digital kind of recreation of what it would look like had it been built. And I think it's, again, it's similar, very similar to an Eiffel Tower kind of thing, but that's what it would have been. But,
Oh, I love that. Oh my God, somebody should really make it.
I mean, it's pretty nice, like, especially with, the kinetic element. But okay, so at that point, basically, I asked people to kind of think, all right, 100 years later, what are some technologies, what's some science, what's some things that are displacing us? And if we were to try to make some new forms, some new, ways to sort of express this, like, what would it be? Sort of a constructivism redux.
For our times.
For our times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe I'll just show a couple examples because every once in a while you see, because like this was this explosive art movement, a bunch of people, really talented people doing this, working in collaboration sometimes, applying it in so many different areas, sometimes in theater, in sort of furniture and clothing. There's many, many examples of how it was applied. But then they all, because of Stalin, had to get out of Russia. And basically it became illegal to do this kind of experimentation. And in its place were these kind of heroic representations of people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The
Yeah,
usual stuff.
right. Yeah, it became this right wing, yeah.
Yeah. Statues to the leader. Yeah.
Right. Back to that first picture of beheading the thing, they actually recreated that statue. They brought him back. But every once in a while, I think you see these sort of the influence of this kind of unfinished project, because a lot of those people went to Germany, went to Europe, Paris, the United States for sure, And they were teaching here, they were working here. So they were kind of less focused, but they were still sort of influencing a lot of people. So this in recent memory is someone who I think really embraced it and is doing interesting things. And it's the architect Daniel Libeskind. So these are some drawings he was doing. And he's sort of trained as an architect, but he is embracing these constructivist ideas and making these kind of nonsense architectural drawings. But then this series especially, I just love, and I think people respond to it. And I think there are maybe 30 drawings or so, and they can be really big, maybe 9 feet. And what they are is when he was younger, he could have been a concert pianist. I guess he was really well trained in chamber music and things, but he always sort of brought that with him when he became an architect. So he decided to make a series of drawings that were his sort of interpretation of these chamber pieces, but with partially a architectural kind of sensibility. And I don't want to say language per se, because there's no like doors and I-beams and things, but it's more sort of the spirit of, say, a blueprint, like plan, elevation, a section. So he puts those two together like a synesthete, and he makes these really wonderful drawings.
Wow, I've never seen these. I love these.
Yeah, they're so beautiful in
Oh my
person too,
God.
because some of them are in pencil and it's just like this really nice line. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things like it's sort of architectural, but then no, it's like an impossible space. But then, and here's I guess another point I want to make and try to make to the students is like if you just say that one thing, like, hey, this is inspired by specific music. Can imagine what it sounds like? Then just that little shift, it's like, oh, yeah, I guess I can start, trying to hear that. I'm sort of seeing how that could be heard with the different tones, the different rhythms, the different sort of patterns, right? Different timbres, textures, right? So it's just like a little shift to say, hey, all right, I'm going to look at it in that way. But,
Yeah, and it's interesting, just comparing it to music is or having them imagine that they're hearing the drawing, is that with visual art you get it all at once, you get the whole, whereas in music, it's progressive, right? It's just one note at a time, or chords or whatever, but it evolves in time, and here it's like you get the whole symphony at once.
right, right.
Yeah.
And that's interesting too, because I mean, especially when my students do the exercise about translating a song into an image, like you immediately come up against that sort of handicap in a sense, like you're not using a time-based medium, so somehow you have to represent time, in a static image, right?
Right.
But then there's ways that you could do that. Maybe in some instances, it's almost like you're looking at the drawing and kind of recreating how they're making it. So you can kind of see like I'm following along, like she wants me to look this way. So it's taking some time to look that way. Or it's kind of this idea of the mirror neuron where you're kind of feeling someone else do it. So like you're feeling those marks being put down. And then it becomes the temporal experience of reading the static drawing. So,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, at first you read it as a whole, but then your eye travels, right? And that takes time. Your eye travels around the different elements, and then, you kind of feel the rhythm or,
right,
yeah.
right. Yeah, actually, that's so many of the, I think, best drawings really take that into consideration because they're asking you, or they're kind of directing you to move, and they're directing you in specific rhythms on how to move, right?
Yep.
So they become very kinetic, even though, right, they're static.
Exactly. Oh, there's so much energy in there and charge. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. So that's one way I often do it for sculpture. So asking that question. And then here's another way, again, back to sort of the drawing. And I begin with this one just because I think it's sort of funny. This is a Henry Moore, this British artist. And this is a 1972 drawing. And, they're wonderful sheep. It's a very nice drawing. But then here, this is 1944. And you see this quasi-abstract sort of figures. And you can kind of see, because I know historians do this with Picasso. They're like, look, he began representationally,
Yeah.
and then he moved abstract to abstraction. But here it's like, well, he's actually kind of doing both. He began, some abstraction, some representation, and kind of seeing it. But then this is kind of our punchline. This is a sculpture, and I think many college campuses have them. This is at Brown, Henry Moore, and it didn't really even occur to me until I saw the picture of the sheep that Henry Moore, I think, very purposely makes these sculptures to put in these kind of quads because that's where all the students hang out looking like sheep. I mean, it really, they are one of them, right? So they're all kind of hanging out, right? And
That's so funny. How do your students respond when you say that?
I mean, they kind of get it because
Yeah.
they hung out and like lied down next to this thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
But here, so this is 1969. So it's just one of those things that it's not like I don't think we can look at it as an evolution whatsoever. Like, oh, you begin representationally and then you become more sophisticated and become abstract, right? I
Yeah.
think at this point, it's just another way like that people can make art. And I think, and I know a lot of abstract artists that regularly go and do figure drawing because it's just one of those things that it trains you. It trains. There's pleasure in it. There's potentially insight into sort of how pieces fit together or how light works, right?
Mhm.
So there's where he's still later on doing representational sort of studies, but he's famous for these abstract forms.
Yeah. Which are not entirely abstract.
Right. Yeah. And that's where also I'm not exactly sure how to even do this because or how to define it because there are some abstract works that maybe are closer to representation than others. And maybe it just has to do with sort of where the inspiration is coming from or how the inspiration is coming from. So I want to talk about this one with respect to that question, like abstraction of what.
Right.
So here's Alexander Calder, this amazing sculptor. I mean, I absolutely adore him. But sort of famously, he began as an illustrator, and he was always making stuff. But in his illustration, he had a job. They told him to go to the circus, which was in town. So he spent a couple of weeks doing all these really delightful drawings of the circus. And then he started just making these little wire figurines. I think he was just constantly kind of making things. But then these wire figurines he became obsessed with those and he started making them into these little kinetic displays. And now people kind of call it like a performance art because he went to live in Paris. And in Paris, he met all these sort of artists from Surrealism, from Dada, and he would do this kind of performance. And they absolutely loved it. So famously, this godfather of conceptual art, Marcel Duchamp, said, I think you should call these mobiles because they move. But I don't think they should be representational. So they kind of convinced him to make non-objective art. And apparently he also visited Mondrian, who is this abstract, geometric painter. And he was very impressed. He's like, wow, you can do a lot with just geometry. So with that influence of like a bunch of those surrealists and Mondrian, he said, all right, I'm not going to depict circus performers or circus animals, but what's there though is still like the kind of kinetic energy of what was exciting to him at a circus. So then he becomes sort of famous for these mobiles. So these mobiles are moving, some slow, some sort of more quick, these kind of trapeze-like artists, and this sort of kinetic energy, right? And they're non-objective, right? They don't represent anything.
And yet they evoke that kind of energy that is
Right,
there at the circus. Yeah.
right, right. They evoke that.
Yeah.
And, it becomes, I mean, it's almost like sui genre, like it is its own thing, like the mobile.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of my prompts. I want people to try to find other ways to make something that is like a mobile, maybe, looking for other types of inspiration, because it's almost like Calder still like owns the ceiling area, or if you're hanging something, it's like, oh, it's like a Calder. But
Right, right. Yeah, it'd be interesting to give them a place, like make a mobile that evokes, I mean, I don't know, the Capitol building, since you were talking about that earlier. A specific place, the mood of a
right, the
place.
mood, right,
So it's not, you're not creating something that looks like the place, it's how it feels to be there.
right. Yeah, and I think actually that is another great way into it. And in the same way, again, that you can, like, you don't have to explain music that doesn't have words. Like, people will hear instrumental music, you have to explain it. Like, they either, are moved by it, maybe even moved to tears, right? If we can become incredibly emotional, or be excited by it, right, and stand up and dance, right? You don't have to explain it, even if it doesn't have words. It's very abstract. It's very non-representational, right?
Yep.
But then you say, all right, there's a lot of instrumental music, and different genres, different attitudes. So that's, I think, another interesting way to try to introduce people. Say, all right, what kind of attitude do you want to share, or what type of attitude do you want to express? Like, maybe this is this joyful kinetic energy, with these primary colors of a circus, but maybe there's something more dystopian, or more sort of dangerous, or more, sort of bleak. I don't know, right? But so you're not necessarily talking about a specific objects or specific things, but that attitude, right?
Ooh, look
Um,
at that.
yeah, I mean, he's just was so good at kind of making all these variations. I think maybe he made 800 or so.
Wow.
Um, and and again, I don't think, maybe in a way he had less issue with people saying, like, what is it, because they were so delightful, and they would move, and
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to talk about that too. It's like there are certain kinds of abstraction that people have much less of a problem with. Like you almost just have a human response to it. And the urge to ask, oh, what does it mean? Doesn't come up,
right,
right?
right,
And I think you're right. Calder is one. I think James Turrell is another. Everybody
right,
loves the
right.
lens. Yeah.
Yeah, so all right, so here's just some other examples. In a way, it's like they have some of the genetic material of constructivism, and it's taking these kind of new materials and sort of seeing what they do, and being purposely sort of non-objective about it. So here, I love this woman, Gigo. That's her sort of stage name or whatever. Or she was Jewish, Gertrude Goldschmidt. She was born and educated in Germany, but then had to leave, went to Venezuela. So she does these things, and they're, simple kind of constructions out of wire, and they're just these playful investigations into sort of what this material can do, and sort of how it can shape space. And maybe this is another thing I would sort of emphasize about abstraction, is that it is very experimental. And that is something that also I think people have sometimes some issues with, or some anxieties with, because some of them may not result in a successful sort of outcome. Or for that matter, if you're thinking about experimentations in the arts, it's not like experimentation in sciences where you can, duplicate the effect, right? The experimentation in the arts maybe is somehow it resonates with people, and like, then maybe that's success. Or somehow it resonates with the artist in such a way that they find a sort of a path to continue going and developing, right?
Yeah.
But it's very experimental. And her mind, you can kind of see her thinking about this. And here's some really wonderful drawings, but she's still kind of thinking, I think, with this linear sort of form in mind. And then they become just more and more sort of environmental and spatial. And there's just these great, great installations.
Mm.
And I love these because, in a way, this is maybe 60s, 50s, but this is sort of not predicts, but this is how so much 3D digital modeling is done with these polyhedra,
Oh, are you right?
right? These
Yeah.
polygons. But
Yeah.
she just kind of figured out a way to do it with wire
Huh.
But then it's like a very kind of three-dimensional digital sort of logic to it, right?
Huh.
And you see these installations, and they're all these kind of different sizes, and it's just, yeah, such an interesting kind of space. But
And I have to say that that seems like another example where this here, where people wouldn't go, "Oh my God, no, I don't know what to think or say," or "What does
right,
this thing mean?" It's just instantaneously, you can appreciate it. You just want you
yeah,
want to, it's cool to look at. You want to go explore it, and you don't really, care about the why, or you're trying to not trying to interpret it.
I think that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's some great pictures of like kids running around them. But anyway, in a sense, again, it has the genetic material of suprematism and the constructivism, but it doesn't have that idea of a new kind of politics or something. But it is, I think, the same idea of trying to find a new language or new language of form and just see where it goes, right?
Hmm.
So,
Or you could say that it kind of posits maybe a set of values. I mean, this is maybe a stretch, but when you look at this, there's just so much delicacy and ephemerality. Maybe not ephemerality because it's wire, but just delicacy and just that it's subject to the air
yeah,
currents moving it, and your presence. It's vulnerable, is what I'm trying to say.
yeah,
Maybe on some unconscious level, it sort of asserts the value of vulnerability.
yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I like that. Actually, I did not include some examples, but there are some examples that are just like a few pieces of wire. Here, there's hundreds and hundreds, but there's just sort of a few,
Yeah.
and it's a work of art. But if you look at just that, it's like, yeah, of course your kid could do that. Of
Yeah.
course, it's doesn't take that much time or talent,
Yeah.
but it's her just again sort of discovering, what it can do, and then kind of seeing what the response is. Because some of the tiny ones are that kind of delicacy, the fragility. It's almost like even like you want to protect it, right? But it's just her saying like, all right, what can I do with this wire to kind of evoke all this different stuff? But,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. It's certainly, art doesn't have to be beautiful or perfect or anything like
right,
that.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, in a way, it kind of redefines, right, what could be beautiful, or
Right.
yeah, the
Exactly.
beauty of imperfection or something. But
There you go.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. All right, so here's the kind of last category of ways that again I use to sort of get people into abstraction, and I do this in the drawing class, and it's just about making marks, so non-objective marks. And I think Saul LeWitt has kind of been enjoying this attention because of kind of our computerized culture, and because now so many kind of kids are thinking about computer code is in their life, or computerized culture, right?
Yep.
But in Saul LeWitt's work, it was this combination of kind of conceptual art, minimalism, but he'd come up with these little recipes, these little algorithms to do drawings. So here, you can see, all right, I'm going to do vertical, horizontal, diagonal, in both directions, and then some overlaps, right? So it's a little algorithm that he has just using pencil.
Mhm.
And then this is what results, right? So the algorithm is interesting because you wouldn't know what this is going to look like until you do it. And then he's insistent on doing it. Like he's going to start and he's going to end. So it's basically a way for him to make some artwork. So I think that idea, it seems to allow students to get into abstraction in another way, which is very process oriented.
Right.
So there's a lot of examples of this. And also this example, and again, this may sit really strangely with a lot of people. I'm sure it did, when he was working, but he has these installations where if you were a collector or museum and you wanted one of his, Saul LeWitt, he would actually send you a little recipe card, like a little, right?
Do it
And
yourself.
the recipe card had, all right, here are the colors, here's the material, and here's the pattern. And then, often he would have his assistants go out and do it, but they would do the recipe. They'd perform the algorithm on that place, right? And
Yeah.
then you knew it was a real Saul LeWitt because it had that signed recipe, right? So a
Yeah.
lot of people, I think, were like, "What the hell? Like you didn't even draw it, right?" But if you just look at it from that perspective, like he came up with the algorithm, then I think people maybe understand it sort of a bit more in a, a contemporary sort of frame.
You know what's analogous, Paul, is do architects actually build the buildings themselves?
Right.
No, they do not.
Yeah.
They design it, they create the blueprints, and other people like builders, build it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I always get a little irritated when it always comes down to, oh, but where's the artist's hand? You know, I can think of any number of like manufactured works, like my friend Soledad Arias, she made these neons. Well, she didn't actually make the neons, of course. She designed them and then called in the order, and they sent her the thing. So this is a great example of that.
Yeah. 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 Also, I mean, talk about algorithms. Oops. I was listening to some sort of sample hip hop the other day, and there's the sound of these drums. I was like, wow, that's fantastic. And I looked it up, and it was from this track from 1971, right? So it's, no problem. We'll sample that, put it in. It's
Right.
about compositioning,
Right.
composition. So in a sense, this is no problem. He's having other people put that sample in, but
Yeah. No, that's also a good analogy. Sampling.
sampling, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so here's some other examples of this idea. And again, I use it as an exercise to kind of loosen people up and to get away from the idea of representing something and more maybe representing a process or using a process to make some kind of marks, right? So it's just really a way to expand the understanding of what drawing is. So here's Richard Serra. He kind of famously came up with a list of verbs that he wanted to do with his materials, like to throw, to rip, to stack. And here he's throwing this lead, and then it dries and he pulls them out. So this is the record of that kind of drawing.
Mm.
And you look at it, it's maybe it's ugly, maybe you're like, where's the composition? But then it's very much, we were talking about the idea of a composition in time. You can understand it through that process of time that it took to do this and kind of recreate what's going on. And yeah, just understand the material in kind of a different way. Here's Richard Long, kind of famously walking the earth, and he just walks back and forth like low impact hiking to make a line. And it exists only as a photograph, but this is, a way to draw. This guy, William Anastasi, he was at SVA for a while, but
No, I don't. I don't know him.
I'm not sure if he's around, but so I always say like, how did this drawing get made? I don't think anyone could figure it out, but basically this artist lived downtown, and every, let's say, Friday, he would go uptown on the subway to visit Marcel Duchamp and play chess. So basically on the subway, he put on noise canceling headphones, sometimes close his eyes, and he would have one pen or two pen on a piece of paper, and he would let the subway make the drawing. So it's this weird record, like a seismograph, right? Of
Yeah,
just
and
that time. Yeah.
I bet they're all different. I mean, every time you took the subway, there are different forces
Yeah.
working, and I find that drawing that you just showed really, really beautiful.
I mean, it's great. And also you just can kind of almost, if you know that little thing, you can almost see like the stops and like how far you went, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I just love the fact that he's visiting Duchamp too.
To play chess, yes.
To play chess, yeah. Right. So again, in that vein, here's Carolee Schneemann, this famous, great feminist performance artist. And she was, making marks, doing drawings, kind of figuring out other ways to sort of embody this mark making. So these are some performances. And sort of Janine Antoni, sort of our contemporary, is updating that. This is a piece that she did where she, again, it's a performative element, but it's sort of a drawing where she uses hair dye and does these sort of drawings with her own hair. And here's sort of Matthew Barney setting up this kind of elaborate system to do drawings where there's all this kind of gym equipment. And his whole narrative is about how you build and break muscle to get stronger. So this is him kind of building and breaking himself to make these kind of drawings. And they're like weird little chicken scratch drawings. But it's all about like him trying to overcome these impediments, like American Ninja or something, to do that drawing. And then that becomes an art installation, a performance. But this one I love is David Hammond's. And again, these are examples I'm using to talk about abstraction and get people to kind of expand their understanding. So New York artist, he made some drawings by using the basketballs that were in some of the basketball courts that were really dirty, and he just bring them to the studio and bounce them up and down.
How fun.
Um,
That was a
and
beautiful drawing. That
I
was
know,
so
right? They're
beautiful.
really
Yeah.
good.
Ah,
I remember, I guess he was just always around as a performance artist. People knew him, loved him, like he was engaging, selling. He was the one that sold snowballs at Cooper Union. People were like, why are you selling snowballs? And so he'd have a conversation about, well, why not? It's art. But then I think at a certain point, so many artists were like, why don't you make stuff and, let's have some exhibitions and show them. So these, when he did that, they were amazing. And then this was kind of I didn't see it, but I think for the age of Instagram, it's such a popular one. It's an installation, this ball that has markers on it. And then during the installation, you can go in there and bounce it all over the place. But so basically you're participating in making this sort of action drawing, right?
and again, I've just found, I mean, I wonder what people who don't have a background in art would think of these. That's always a big question for me. It's like I'm really interested in what people who don't know art history or know how something was made, just what is their gut response to something. And for me, I mean, I find them beautiful. The intricacy of these little things and that fuzzy edge. It's just really
Yeah.
fun to look at.
Right. Formally, it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And then it's almost like with the idea of listening to something, if you try to shift your kind of perception here, you can hear this like kids, making rambunctious kids bouncing it all over the place, right? It's like you can recreate what's going on here, but
Oh, that's so true. That's loud.
yeah, it's loud, right? And then just a couple more examples. I love this artist. He's, I believe, a Korean artist, and I don't know exactly how he begins, but they're just pen, like a big pen,
Yeah.
and he probably just decides like I'm going to start here. I'm going to make marks and until my pen runs out. Sometimes I have a project where I give everyone a pen, and I say do a drawing until the ink runs out. So it's like an ink pen drawing. It's kind of interesting to see how much ink is in a pen. This is probably more than one pen, but anyway. But I just love
Oh,
these. Yeah, I mean, they're great, right? And I have a feeling when he begins, he has no idea what it's going to look like. So
huh.
this is his kind of experimental. I'm going to make some marks, right? And
Yeah.
I'm going to see where they go. And I don't know. I love looking at them because there's something also super restful and meditative about it, even though there's a lot of energy behind them, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, really pretty nice.
Oh my God, I love those. Do you have his name?
Can you see it in the bottom?
Oh,
Yep.
Ili. Okay, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Cool.
And then I think I just have two more examples. And again, this is the idea of the sort of algorithm or kind of recipe. Here's Michelle Grabner over at the Art Institute of Chicago. She was the curator of a Whitney Biennial a decade ago. But some of her work is so wonderful. It's related sort of in between painting and textiles and drawing. But here it's just silver pen. What do you call it? Silver tip on paper. And I think, looking at it, I don't know too much about her process, but it's like, all right, I'm going to begin in the center and do these straight lines out from the center, this concentric place, and see what happens, right?
Mhm.
So the algorithm is simple. From the center, make these straight lines, but then what you get from it is like a visual experience that's really interesting with the irregularities and just what happens there. But
Yeah.
and here's another one. Some of them are a little bit like optical illusions. And I think it's because of the relation to textiles, because often textiles play around with some optical effects. And then last one, this is an artist who's in Providence here, Tisha Rizdi
Hmm.
sometimes. I just love her process. She begins by just doing these small little paintings or drawings, and she'll do like a little patch, just like one little thing and then she'll have, I don't know, dozens, hundreds, and she'll say, all right, let me see what happens if I make an algorithm out of it and just recreate it. So they're kind of most often on some kind of grid or some structure, but then it's just recreating that one instance and then stepping back at the end and saying, whoa, like you could not have predicted,
Yeah.
what's going on, right?
Yeah.
So and there are all these little patches, and then they're kind of unfolded, right?
Oh.
And it's just such a surprising, abstraction again.
Cool.
And it's very, computer, although she herself says, like, I don't want anything to do with computers or math necessarily, but she, I think, is responding though to this sort of algorithm culture we live in, to make these.
Wow.
Yeah, I think they're really nice. And I think she says that, the amount of times that she sort of stops and says, I don't like this one is, I don't know what, 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1. She says she stops a lot, try to find what's going on, what kind of surprises are going on. So,
Right.
yeah.
Wow.
All right. So those are some of my prompts.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. It's so interesting to hear how you approach abstraction, from a sculptor's perspective, because I think, well, I mean, just naturally, I think less about sculpture. So that was fascinating. But also, you can think of sculpting, a lot of them that you showed, as drawing in space, right? So
Right.
that's what I tell my students. It all comes down to drawing. Everything's drawing.
Yeah,
basically.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
An expanded definition of drawing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was really great. So you talked a little bit in your presentation about, challenging the idea of this progression from, the idea that every artist starts with working from observation, and then they become more sophisticated and move to abstraction. And I appreciate that very much, because that's actually something that I do emphasize to my students, that we all start off working from observation. It's not like Mondrian came out of the womb, making this kind of art. So for those who don't know, this is Mondrian's very famous Broadway Boogie Woogie, 1946, sort of the iconic geometric modernist abstraction. People go to a museum, see this, and they don't know what to think if they don't have an art background, right? It's like, this is early Mondrian, 1887. So he started out, working from observation. And this is going to be an example of something I call grounded abstraction. That may not be the best term, but I'll explain what I mean by it. Grounded abstraction is the kind that began with, observation, like this, observing objects in the world, painting them as the artist sees them, and then gradually abstracting them, sort of simplifying, rendering slightly flat, obviously exaggerating the colors, taking a lot of liberties. So, but yet, when you look at this is also Mondrian's, is the progression. They still evoke tree, right? They still evoke tree. But he gradually, and a lot of abstraction is like that. It's sort of like abstracting away from the visible world, but kind of, keeps one foot in it, like Picasso, for example. But he gets more and more abstract, more and more. This is still, maybe evoking trees, a forest. But that's how he arrived at his mature style, because he realized that he became really interested in, just the verticals and horizontals. It was just the vertical thrusts with those horizontals, and that's the thing that drew him to trees to begin with. So eliminate all else and just give us these. I also start with, I ask my students if they know what to abstract means, like the word, and eventually we arrive at, to abstract means to draw away from, to separate, right? So the question is, what gets drawn away from or separated from what? And I tell them, well, with abstraction, you're drawing away just the visual elements, the formal elements, that we use to make art. Line, shape, color, all of those get drawn away from the observable world and just presented as things of interest in themselves. Similarly, with Kandinsky, started, with the world of observation. This is he was really inspired by Russian folk art, It's a beautiful, beautiful little painting. It kind of evokes stained glass. And then here, he's moving away from the observable world. You can tell, that you can still see the horses and the riders, but he's doing a lot with the color, just for color's sake, becoming more and more abstracted, until eventually he reached this point, and this is not totally abstract yet either. You can kind of see mountains and figures, maybe two figures up there on the right, and then that little rainbow on the left. It's very corny, Kandinsky, but nevertheless, it's things that exist that he was looking at in the visible world, right? Until finally he just went full on abstract. And this is really what I think of as pure abstraction, right? When it doesn't start from observation at all. And Paul, you touched a little bit on music, and I think that's one thing that really should be further discussed, because so Kandinsky was really interested in synesthesia. He was a synesthete, and for him, as Paul said, different colors evoked different sounds. He heard different sounds, and so an abstract painting like this is like a symphony. We're hearing it all at once. But I want to return to the question that you posed. People don't seem to have any problem, people with a non-music background don't seem to have any problem appreciating instrumental music without lyrics, right? But yet, they have for some reason, abstract art is a problem. I just think that's really, do you have any opinions about that?
Yeah, I think it is honestly a little bit of a failure of the educational framing, because, or let me tell a quick story about this, a colleague of mine who's been teaching painting here. For many years, he taught at a high school program in the area, AS 220. And he said that when he started, he loves abstraction. He's sort of an abstract painter. He would show the slides of, significant historical abstract painters to these high school kids. And he said they were just cold, no response. Is very difficult. But then for whatever reason, he started doing T-shirts and clothes. And then he realized, when he talked about those same painters in the context of making fabrics for clothes, making fabrics for shirts, they absolutely exploded with enthusiasm, talking about form and color and composition and what it made them, what kind of attitude was being conveyed and all of this.
Wow.
Basically, they were talking about, what the abstract painters want you to talk about and want you to feel. Yeah. But it just took them, to wear it. So maybe it's that context of it's a rectangle on a gallery wall or museum wall. But it was such a kind of curious, just a little shift of focus. But
that is so interesting. Yeah, I think people are respond to color, respond to form natively. We all have a response to the visible world, and we don't need to know exactly what we're looking at to appreciate certainly color. But you're right. So it's how we're educated, how art is framed and kind of rarefied. I think, fine art, ooh.
Yeah.
Right. So expensive, and it's so, it's like a closed club.
Yeah, I think it is like the rectangle of a painting too, because it's really convenient to do a painting on a stretcher, put it up. But then somehow that's become, it's almost like, all right, this is divorced from the world if it's in this rectangle, right?
Right.
If it's a T-shirt, no, I'm communicating with that. And maybe I was thinking about this, another sort of reframe that could happen is this idea of when you're with a really young kid and they're doing a drawing, you see the kid saying, look, and often an adult will say, what is it, right? And I think that question is very frustrating because it might not be anything, right? It might just be, but if you don't ask them what it is, but what are you feeling about that? Maybe they're like, this is me being really frustrated, or so it's already saying to them it needs to represent something.
Right. That's so interesting. That's something we can certainly change. Yeah, that's just an unconscious inherited assumption that that works of art have to be about something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Certainly, visual art has to be, like you said, what is it? It's about a certain thing in the world. And I want to return to that a little bit later. I'll just speed this up. So this is also Kandinsky, later Kandinsky. Sure, it evokes. So one can look at this and say, oh, that reminds me of hieroglyphics. That's like writing. So it's evoking things that are seen, in things in the visible world. So I'm still calling that grounded abstraction. Here are these wonderful little Bryce Marden ink drawings. He was inspired by calligraphy, and it certainly evokes calligraphy. But you don't have to be thinking calligraphy to just appreciate, the line, the lyricism of these lines, and just your eyes moving around, as if you yourself had created them or were dancing the lines, or it's just cool to look at. Arthur Dove, great painter. I'm sure you know this one, Paul. It's foghorns. It's a painting meant to evoke that sound, and to me that's a particularly powerful one because it really does. I mean, I can hear it.
No, I've never seen that actually,
Oh,
but there's
really?
yes, synesthetic painting, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Very paragon of that. So I'm still on grounded abstraction. This is Lee Yufan, a Korean painter. I don't know what it is for him. It just doesn't even matter. I never think about the artist's intentions, but for me, I think a lot of people, my students look at this and think sky, right? Sky. It's sort of like the transition from lighter to darker as you look up from the horizon. And then finally, we get to this. And this is, I think, what my students have the hardest time with of all. Okay, so something like this that is not rooted in, that did not originate in observation of the visible world is, I think, what my students have the hardest time with. Because it can seem arbitrary or, they don't understand. And how many times, Paul, do we hear, oh, I see a face? People are looking in visual art, they're looking for things, recognizable things that exist in the world. And it's so hard to shift their thinking in terms of, well, I talk a lot about mood. What's the mood of this piece? It's like, to me, it's all about mood. Woo, it's like mysterious, it's soft, it's, there's this nice little, I don't know, it's kind of, the lines are interacting melodiously. So you can imagine what this would sound like. Again, just, well, for me, this one is evocative of different kinds of interior spaces. But it's just about the colors interacting and vibrating and that glow, that wonderful glow.
Who is that one?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is also Kandinsky.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Did I mention that was Kandinsky?
I think I knew that one. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So this is also Kandinsky. Yeah, really, 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 these are his lesser known works. They're just these little works on paper that I find incredible. And so I suggest to people, again, instead of looking for things, identifiable things, just think of the mood. What kind of mood does this evoke? Pollock. People love to hate on Pollock. This is the kind of thing where it would fall into the my kid can do that category. But I always tell my students, well, you can test that empirically. Try one. I think what you will discover is that there's actually a real structure to Pollock's paintings. There really is. They're very composed. But regardless of, the work or the talent that went into it, I just, encourage people to just go sit in front of one of these things and really just look at it and feel the energy. There's so much energy in there. There's so much going on, or hear it, right? This one's very loud to me. My students in particular, usually really, really, really dislike Pollock because they think it's so easy. But once you can convince them that there is real structure and skill, then they can turn that's a big one, Paul. But
Yeah.
people thinking
Yeah.
things are easy, right?
I wonder if Pollock has kind of become at this point sort of a representation of abstraction too, because I don't know, I'm thinking like MTV in the 80s, you have this kind of paint splattered paint guitar. It's like a trope
Yeah.
about abstraction. I don't know. But it is so different if that's, on a backpack versus, you know, sitting in front of one in a museum. It is a very different kind of physical experience you have.
Right, right. But again, there's something hallowed about that picture rectangle.
Right.
That's what
Right.
people think I'm saying.
Yeah.
There's this assumption. But you're right. If my students showed up, to class wearing this, everybody'd be like, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if, or I'm trying to think if anyone sort of students actually hate it. I think maybe there's a little bit of indifference because they're like, that's that abstract stuff, right? Uh,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's almost like become its own thing. But
right. And it's so recognizable. I mean, people have seen it. It's like Van Gogh. People have seen it a million times.
yeah.
Yeah, oversaturation. This is Joseph Albers, and this is also another one that's particularly difficult. Albers for students, and I would imagine for people without an art background, like they're all the same. They're always these concentric squares. But once you tell people, don't try to understand or decode. Don't interpret, but just look at the color. It's really all about the colors interacting with each other, right? He was all about the interaction of color. That chartreuse square on the left looks totally different in the context of those colors on the left than it does on the right and in the context of those colors. And do you show these to your students? I guess maybe not, because you don't do painting.
I do a little bit. Sometimes I talk about purposefully making space ambiguous. And I think these are really good at doing that. And it kind of verges into optical illusions. And there is that phenomena of op art, sort of optical illusion art.
Right.
I don't think that these are exactly there, but I think that's another way that people can sort of get into it by saying like, all right, is there some optical effect going on here that is unexpected?
Mm.
And that idea of contextual color, like colors looking different based on what they're next to, like that's kind of, if you look at enough of these, like that's exactly what's going on. Like
Yeah.
how malleable those colors are relative to one another. But
And that can lead to a really, that's a wow moment when you realize color is not like a static fixed thing in the world.
yeah,
It's entirely contextual. It doesn't even exist in the world. It's like a function of your brain interacting with light.
yeah, yeah,
So when my students understand that, then they can appreciate the Albers. Like, wow. Okay, so this is another kind of art that I think people can find difficult. Students, sort of gestural abstraction. This is Sam Francis. Although I have to say, I mean, come on, can anybody look at that and not think that's beautiful? I think what throws people off is the presence of the drips. This is Cy Twombly, okay? Similar gestural, lyrical abstraction, but he's got those drips. And I think a lot of people not familiar with art in general, and modern art specifically, but would think, well, that's just so sloppy. That's so careless. It doesn't look like a painting that should be in a museum. It looks like a study. And so I tell people, well, but think about it for a second. So in looking at this, like you said, the mirror neurons, our bodies are kind of reenacting the stroke that Cy Twombly was making when he made this painting. So we're kind of feeling it in our muscles. And then while he's doing this, gravity is saying, no, it's like there's something profound about gravity. Its ubiquitous presence and how it's always pulling on our bodies. I think it's really all about the interaction of human assertion, asserting this mark in this very beautiful stroke, and then with the gravity, so that the painting wouldn't be the painting without the drips.
yeah. Another thing, somewhat related, I think, is I love Robert Ryman, who spent 60 years doing white paintings, but I never show them as slides because you can't see them. And also, it's so hard to justify like 3 of them or 4 of them, or let alone one, right? Because you really have to see the 40 years.
Yeah.
Because if you're like reasonably intelligent person and you decide, I'm going to concentrate on making white paintings, you're going to find stuff. And it's very subtle, but when you see it, there you go. When you see it, it's like, whoa, like I found it. I found something else, right? And it's
Yeah.
exciting. But so and I don't know how to address that, but you can't just see one, right? You have to see you have to see dozens and dozens and dozens or something like that. But
No, totally. I think of it as it's a total environment. I mean, but imagine being, a non-art person and you're going out to see some fantastic, beautiful paintings. You walk into a gallery, all white. The space is white, everything's white, the paintings are white.
yeah,
You might feel like, come on, what
yeah,
is
it
this?
seems like a joke. Yeah,
It does seem like a joke, and they're worth millions of dollars.
yeah,
No
yeah,
one's.
right, right.
And I tell people, okay, hold on now, without,
Yeah,
jumping into judge. Let's just go and spend some time and look at each one. And here you goes, the single
yeah,
slide.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's stuff going on there. There's like so much texture and paints, I mean, brush strokes, and it creates this little buzz.
Yeah.
And there's that edge. I don't know why that's delicious, but for some reason it
Yeah,
is to
yeah.
me, you know?
I mean, I really kind of can't see. I can see one, but I appreciate them in really long series because then you can see like when he discovers something that he is new to him, and then he runs with it a little bit, and it's something as small as showing the edge, right?
Yeah.
But it's like you see him kind of discovering that, and then running with it, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, first of all, this is obviously art that you have to stand in the presence of
Yeah,
and seeing them in a series. But I think that with art like this, and I do have quite a few of those to show, Agnes Martin would be a similar one.
right, right.
You know, people think, what the hell? But the longer you stay without trying to interpret, without trying to decode, there's nothing there like that. Don't worry about verbalizing what you're experiencing. Stop language, just look. In time, your senses sharpen and you start to see little glitches, little differences arrive.
Yeah,
And for some reason, I mean, I always think of abstract art as something that acts on our body. It's like our bodies are instruments and these things are playing us physiologically. We start having this little bit of,
that's nice. Yeah.
yeah, this little bit of like, just like a very subtle, rhythm in our muscles, or, maybe,
That's it. That's synesthesia there, um,
yes.
from the visual to sort of the tactile or motor kinetic.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
So I've never thought about it that way, but because that is how I experience art.
yeah.
So I'm a synesthete. My
That's
body
absolutely
starts.
one of, I think there's like 60 categories. That's definitely one of them.
Oh, nice.
But again, what do you think about that idea? Like, I love her so much, but again, I don't show too many of them because I think you have to look at 100 of them to
Yeah.
really like say, wow, look at this one. Like, they're all based on a grid, but she's messing with that grid. Like it's almost like she hates the grid, but they're all based on the grid. So they're always right. They're always, but I think I have to kind of somehow understand that there's thousands of them to really look at one and say, all right, I don't know how if you were just looking at one without the knowledge of the other ones, I'm not sure what it would be, but what
Yeah.
do you think about that? Like having
Well,
having that in context, but
I think that knowing, seeing them as a group, many, 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 like at the Guggenheim, is always preferable, really. And I don't so much respond to all of them, but there's some that
yeah,
I could look at singly,
yeah,
alone, and I just really get into them. I see so much in there, so that I even stop thinking about where placing the piece in her career. Historically, how did she arrive at this from that? And I just see the thing itself, and it's,
yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I could see that.
yeah.
But they're not all like that, right?
Oh
But
no,
some of them absolutely are. And she had to do the other ones to get there kind of thing. But
exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. So similarly, Ad Reinhardt, people walk into the gallery, think, "Oh my God, black paintings," like what is this? But I tell people, just look.
yeah.
They're not black, and there's so much color, and these shapes, squares, rectangles start to really work on you. And you can see more and more the more you sit with them, and then a student will say, well, so what? They're squares. I encourage people, stop thinking so much in terms of what you're looking at and think in terms of what it's doing to you, right? And how you're responding. It's a thing that's doing something to you. It's not like you're just looking at it and assessing it, oh, squares, and moving on, right? It's like it's playing you. And of course, they're not all black. I mean, that one's easier to see the treasure in them. And of course, the Rothko Chapel. I'll just give a little personal story. I've mentioned that my husband is an engineer, does not have an art background at all, is in fact, a little intimidated by it. I mean, for good reason. People think that you have to know about it to have a response. But we went to Houston not too long ago, and we went to the Rothko Chapel, and man, boy, did he respond.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
We were in this place for an hour, and we just sat there in silence in different parts of the room. Have you been here?
I haven't.
Oh my God, so it's really intense. It's really special. And he couldn't stop talking about him.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, just like how much color there is and how much, there's pulses. These things just pulse, they breathe, and they just exude the numinous, however, or the spiritual, however you want to define that. But the one that I really wanted to get to was this, because I have begun to think of architecture a lot in terms of art and abstract art. This is a wonderful little chapel in Helsinki. I went last year to Finland, and it's a chapel. It's called the Kampi Chapel, and it's the center of Helsinki. It's specifically for silence. You go there, you have to be silent. There's no speaking. There's no noise. You go there to sit in silence, and a lot of times you're alone. And so the first time I went to this place, I was mostly alone, and I sat. And, so at first it's like, well, there's nothing to look at here, but you sit and you sit and you sit and you feel the presence of the space, and you start to notice little things like the rhythms, formed by the patterning on the wood walls. The little slats are all kind of performing different rhythms, and the wood grain is different in each piece of furniture. And the main thing is, and here we go with synesthesia again, I started to hear the silence. It's like I started to hear, it wasn't silent. It had a texture to it, a very specific texture, and a very specific feel and sound. And it's just unbelievable. I mean, it's very similar to an Ad Reinhardt painting. You walk in and you don't see anything at first, and you're like, maybe I'll stay a minute or two, but something starts to happen. It's working on you. And the reason that I like architecture, and I encourage other people who find abstract art difficult to think about architecture, is you never walk into a building and get anxious because you don't know what it means. You don't say, oh my God, I got to interpret this shit. What am I going to say? I've got to use language that's really sophisticated. You don't. It's pure experience. You're immersed in this thing, this work of art, and there's no anxiety. It's just pure experience. Couldn't people experience abstract art like that? This is another. We'll end here, but this is another church in Helsinki, just north of Helsinki, called the Myoda Church. I mean, tell me that's not musical. You walk into this space and it's playing you. It's just playing on you. They've got, this is it's like walking into an abstract painting. And again, you're relaxed because you don't have to say anything. You don't have to interpret. It's just doing it to you. It's doing something.
Yeah. That's interesting about the space where you're not supposed to speak. So I have a colleague who, Ed Osborne, who's a sound artist, and he believes that he became interested in sound and became a sound artist ultimately because he was raised as a Quaker. So they have the silent meetings. So when he was a kid and, a Quaker gathering being silent, you have to just listen. So he became very attuned to just listening, and there's always something to hear, but
yes,
maybe that is like, there's no ritual like that where we're just looking at something. So then, I don't know, if there was, maybe yeah, we'd be able to see. Because I do think the idea of going into a building and not having the anxiety about speaking about it, maybe people can still justify it by like, well, it's a building. It has a use to it, right? I love this building, or like, I don't like this building, but like it still has a use.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's not, yeah, it has a utilitarian function, but all buildings, it seems to me, have a mood, right?
Yeah,
It's the space, right? And so when I think about my work or talk about my work, it's really about mood, you know? Each one is sort of creating a different mood.
do you ever find that giving a little bit of a clue helps, like with titling or something? Because this idea of giving them a little bit, maybe you're talking about grounded abstraction, but a little bit of a kind of a nudge or entry point.
Yeah, titles, they always ask, and I actually, I mean, I'll give it to them, but I discourage them from thinking about the title too much because then they just go there and they stay there,
Right.
right? Let's think the futurist, painting dynamism of the train or something like that. But it's an abstract painting, dynamism of some passing train. Then all they think about is passing
Yeah,
train.
that's right. Right, right.
They think, okay, the artist is saying something about industrialization, about modernization, rather than looking at it.
Yeah, yeah,
That's something I was going to talk about with regard to my own work because, yeah, people just, if you give it a title that's intriguing, people are going to stay there.
yeah, yeah. Or, but what about a title that's evocative of a mood? I mean, there, I guess, yeah, it would be the similar thing. You get stuck in the word,
Yeah,
um, but you're trying to do something that's not describable with words. That's why you're doing it.
right,
So, but I
right.
guess it is, or yeah, maybe just trying to circumscribe it a little bit. I mean, it's an issue for me. And I think anyone who does abstraction, like you don't just want to have like an untitled abstraction, right? But a little bit of thing.
Yeah. I think it's a nice thing to do I think titles can be great, especially when titles are kind of like, ooh, that's intriguing because if it's something that's not immediately evident,
Yeah,
like not a descriptive title, but something different, some other kind of evocative word that goes like this with the work, that has a conversation that creates something else. Yeah. But it's just, yeah, they're to be used with caution.
yeah,
Speaking of our work, do you want to jump into yours?
yeah, sure.
Excellent.
Okay, so here's just a kind of short presentation about the work, sort of most recent work, and I'm putting it into a little bit of a context because I recently gave this talk to high school. So I just wanted to frame it a little bit in more of a clear way than I would typically do. But I call it poly perspectives, and that is based on an idea that comes from music. Because often I kind of joke that I could not make any art ever unless I sort of have music in my life or was listening to music. So like periods of time and periods of artwork are definitely in my sort of memory associated with specific, albums or bands that I've been listening to. So I'm also sort of a total amateur drummer, and just kind of do it for fun and every once in a while play with other people. But poly perspectives then comes from an idea in music called polyrhythms. And what polyrhythms are is basically having multiple time signatures together. So sometimes it feels like really awkward and off, but then sometimes it resolves and it like tightens. So often it's a sense of being off kilter, but then back, off kilter, then back. And they're really interesting to listen. And when you hear them, you don't maybe intellectually sort of count the numbers and beats and everything, but you kind of feel what's going on. So I am thinking about that relative to space, and with this body of work. So this is just from Wikipedia. These are different graphical projections of space. And there's been a whole bunch developed over time about basically how you represent a three-dimensional object two-dimensionally with graphic projection.
Hmm.
So I've basically taken a couple of these that are commonly sort of used and started messing around with them together. So this is what you would learn in art school. It's linear perspective, two-point perspective, as developed in the Renaissance. And this is a great example. In my drawing class, every section I always begin with a Da Vinci example, because Da Vinci has every type of drawing, engineering, fanciful, like preliminary, totally sort of caricature, like every conceivable type of drawing Da Vinci does. But here's an example of his linear perspective, which he uses to create effect. And it's very sort of understood. And in a way, I don't know, sometimes I joke that I'm proud to be an artist with that as a lineage, because it really is this discovery that, it's between mathematics and engineering and architecture. Like, it's this great kind of discovery about how to represent space in this convincing illusionistic manner. Okay, so on the opposite side is the isometric perspective. So this is when you don't have receding lines. All the lines are parallel, and it's a very odd space, but it can be a pretty useful space. So iso means equal, so the lines sort of are equal on both sides. And isometric perspective historically was developed and used in Asian art, Chinese, Korean, Japanese. And there's all these examples, especially when there's some architecture in a landscape where you have this isometric perspective. So you don't see that illusion of space. And it's just a different way of kind of understanding the world. When Europeans brought their linear perspective to Asia, when Asia was starting to open up and there's exchange, there's examples of some Asians using it, but then saying, you know what, we like ours better. And it really is an idea that in a linear perspective, you have one person, like a one view, and you can really situate like where that person is. In an Asian isometric, there's no one place that the viewer is. The viewer, in a way, is omnipotent. Like, they are everywhere within this space. And also, there's like no shadows in isometric or Asian perspective. And they came to realize that the Asian artist wanted to depict space and things this way because it was their ideal. They wanted this kind of non-individualistic sort of omnipotence, right? So what it turns out to be is just a difference of how you see the world, right? So here is the other one, and I'm not going to get too deep into this, but it has to do with these mathematical concept of other dimensional spaces besides three. So the long and short of it is that there's ways to figure out and understand higher dimensions mathematically, but our brains cannot visualize what's going on. Like, I think it's just one of those things that the people that study it are trying in so many different ways to do it. But just because we live experientially in a three-dimensional world, we can't experience four dimensions. So you use a bunch of sort of analogies. So here is a type of projection of a four-dimensional cube called a hypercube. And the biggest or most kind of successful analogy that these mathematicians use is, you can imagine a three-dimensional cube giving a shadow onto like the ground, and that shadow is in two dimensions. So you can imagine the relation between a three-dimensional object and a two-dimensional shadow. So just as you can imagine that, imagine a four-dimensional object giving a three-dimensional shadow. So we can get an intuition about what that four-dimensional object is through a three-dimensional shadow. So again, I think it is impossible to literally visualize because, again, we just aren't in that space. But mathematically and conceptually, it exists. And we're learning all kinds of new things about it, like how to pack information and how to, whatever, physicists talk about it. But anyway, I think that space is absolutely fascinating. So as kind of an algorithm or way to frame this body of work, I said, hey, I'm going to take the linear perspective. I'm going to take isometric because I'm half Japanese and I grew up looking at a lot of this art, just posters kind of thing with the isometric system. And I'm going to try to put them together and see what's going on. So this is like one of the first little things and it has the three: isometric, linear, and then the indication of the four dimension. And then I basically started running with it. So that's what this series is about. It's kind of experimenting with how those systems are not compatible, and how it's almost like having two operating systems. Like
Mm.
they just can't work. But when I'm overlapping them, and when I'm kind of looking at the relation between them, I think interesting stuff is starting to happen. I should also say that for the past 20 years or so, I've been making mostly illuminated sculptures. So some sculpture that has some light in aspect. So I take advantage of the shadow as well as the object itself.
Mm.
So anyway, and again, I don't know, like if you need to know, like, oh, this is how they go about, how he goes about making them. But I'll easily tell, and associated with this material, I think will be, those are the systems that, like, he was doing it. But hopefully the things that I'm making, aren't from a recipe. It was just like those were the inspirations, and now I'm running with it, and I'm
Yeah.
seeing what's going on, right?
Wow.
So
What's happening here? Is this two panels? I mean, what?
so it's a and so here's another funny thing about it. I love the ambiguity that results from these kind of incompatible things. So I try to amplify it. But what's going on is there's a light strip that's pointing towards the wall, and in between the light strip and the wall is the sculpture. So it is projecting all kinds of shadows. So that's what's going on.
Wow.
So unfortunately, some of them more than others, you kind of have to like see in person. But I always
Yeah.
think of Frank Stella saying any painter, whenever he said it in the 60s, any painter has to make a painting that looks good in an art magazine. But now I'm not sure, like any painting or any artwork has to look good in Instagram or something, but I don't know.
Well, you know what? You got tons of them. I mean, yeah, just they're really interesting visually. You say you tell people what you're thinking about and how they're made and all that. But this strikes me as an example where it's just so cool to look at and like figure out. Everybody knows what shadows are, and you're trying to figure out like where the shadows are coming from and light. And do you find that people generally do not respond with like, huh?
Uh, I mean, I've had one show of these recently, and people liked them, and I don't think there was that much confusion. I think maybe they were like, "Wow, like that's a weird thing I've never really seen, but it's this interesting stuff." And then maybe even some people, when I was explaining how I made them, were less kind of interested in that, and we're like, "Well, it looks interesting, but yeah, I don't know." It's just I think about it because every kind of group of works I do, I somehow, and I don't know if it's a crutch or something, but I have a little bit of a theme that just helps me to like make variations. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
do you
Yeah.
do something similar to that?
In terms of variations on a theme, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Um, it's funny though, while you were presenting that, I thought there's a really big difference between artists talking about their work, and we want to and we have to, talk about what we think about and our process and our ideas and what inspired what. But I try to encourage people who are uncomfortable with abstraction to do exactly the opposite. To hear nothing of what the artist has to say, to read nothing, don't do anything. You can do that later, right?
yeah,
But just first go experience it, you know?
yeah,
Because that's gonna, I think, remain with you is that first encounter where it's palpable, the
yeah,
response, and then everything else can just be piled on top of that.
yeah, yeah. I like that a lot. I do think there's one experience that you probably had, I think people have had, where it sort of is like almost like a trick, where they're looking at something, and then when they read the plaque, um, they find out something about it that kind of undercuts your experience. And this often happens with some conceptual work where it's like, the title plaque says like, oh, this, I don't know, group of rocks was taken out from underneath the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So when you read that, you're like, oh, but if you just looked at the pile of rocks, you might, try to experience it as an aesthetic experience. But then when you read, something, that's so obviously conceptual and so obviously specific, then it kind of undercut your experience,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's other examples of that, but it is like, I don't know, maybe for people to get bearings, like saying, all right, can I just go and have an aesthetic experience? Or is there some idea that I really need to know before I have this experience? But
Right, right, right. Well, and there are different kinds of work, right? I mean, with conceptual work, it's really the part of it. So much a big part of it is knowing,
yeah,
um, yeah, knowing the idea. Some work is not primarily sensual, right? And that's fine. But with work that is primarily sensual, and I don't like to say visual because all work to me is multi-sensorial, like whether you're aware of it or not. If you stand in the presence of something, you are smelling it, and with the mirror neurons, there's the touch and all the muscular movements. But yeah, not sure where I was going with that. But anyway, yeah. So people need to be aware of the difference, I guess, between
yeah,
reading the wall label and that pure original first
right.
experience.
Yeah, right. Maybe that is again this idea of like the art kind of structure as it exists now just isn't great about being that open or welcoming or sort of conducive. Because if there is a sense like, am I being tricked? Or like, why is this so expensive? Or like, what's going on here? Then you want to maybe get as much information before allow yourself to kind of lose yourself in the thing, or to have those experiences. But
Hmm, hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, so much needs to change, but I think we've hit on some things. Just talking about, I like your example of changing the way that we talk about children's art. What is it, right? To
yeah,
just, respond to it. Just, um, when I started making art when I was like 2 or whatever, it was always abstract, which is weird,
yeah, yeah,
And my mom would ask me, "What is that?" And I would say, "It's just a design."
yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, well, in talking about all this, it occurs to me there's so much to talk about. This could be a whole series, but I'll just end with a few of my images. Okay. So this is a fairly recent drawing. I make big drawings. It's like I don't know, 8 feet high.
8 feet.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah.
I've
So
only seen these on Instagram and they look great. I love them,
thank you,
but
thank you. Well, that's funny that they look great on Instagram. That is actually really funny.
I think they look great. But yeah, I didn't know that it was 8 feet. That's even more amazing. But
Yeah, they're huge. So it's relatively simple, obviously, the composition. It's these two things that look like slits, but it's so different when you stand in front of it and it's larger than you are. And then, of course, there's all the stuff that happens when you look at it close up. There's the little grain, the texture of the paper creates a little pulsation. But so here's an example of the title of this piece is Double Slit. And once they know the title, a lot of people go straight to, oh, does this have to do with the double slit experiment in physics? And I say, no. And, if people want to think of that, it's fine. I'm not telling people what to think or how to feel. But the second most frequent response is, oh my God, it's so three-dimensional. The way you did that looks like they're like these little raised ridges, right? On the surface of the paper, it's casting a shadow. And that's cool, but to me, I don't see that. That wasn't, why I made it at all. But so for me, it's really just about something that happens. It's about an experience that you got. It creates a mood. You're standing in its presence, you kind of feel the glow. Yeah. Again, we come back to the difference between an artist talking about their work and how I recommend experiencing abstract art for those who aren't familiar with it. Because I could launch into some whole thing about I was inspired by the church that I went to in Helsinki.
Did you make some smaller ones before this one?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I generally do that. Not always, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes I'll just, jump right in. It's risky. I mean, they don't work out all the time by any means. This one is also 96 inches.
Wow. They're great. Yeah.
Thank you. There's really nothing to say,
So your head is sort of just below that third one, or the third one from the bottom.
Yep, correct. Yep. So I work on a wall, and I'm using a ladder and going up and down.
And it's charcoal on paper?
It's actually the tiniest bit of charcoal powder, only because that brings forward the grain of the paper.
Yep.
But then it's pencil.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. It's like ordinary pencils, but I have
yeah.
the full range of them.
Can you see some pencil marks?
Yes, you can. I wonder if I don't really have a good detail, but you can kind of see the texture there. It's really like this. I'm doing like really loose kind of scribbly strokes, and layer upon layer upon layer upon
Yeah.
layer,
Yeah.
right? It turns into these values, and but yeah, if you look at it closely, you can see them.
Wow.
And I think those are important because, and I know I overuse this word, but like, well, I'll use a different word, like a little charge, a little jolt. It's like a little bit of electricity, kind of activates you in a way that a smooth surface would activate you differently, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And also probably profoundly different than looking on the screen, but they work on a screen also. Like that. I mean, I've only seen them on screen, and they're very exciting. But
That's really interesting to hear. I appreciate that. Thank you, because yeah, I always think, yeah, here's like a little close up. You can see the grain a little bit,
wow. Yeah.
the grain of the paper. And I guess I would situate myself somewhere in between what I call grounded abstraction and more pure abstraction. Because oftentimes I am thinking of something like here, it's standing on a shoreline and looking out over the sea. I don't tell people that in the titles or anything, but to me, it's very clearly, looking out at the horizon and just having this mood.
So is your pencil pretty dull when you're doing it? Because you're not sharpening your pencil all the time, are you?
Oh no, I am.
Oh, you are.
I am sharpening the whole time. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I'll use dull, but then you can really see. It's like they leave
Yeah.
discernible. I mean, a dull pencil will leave like a really thick line.
Yeah.
And to me, it's just all about that thin line, layer upon layer
Wow.
upon layer.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
Just experiential. And I think,
Yeah.
you know, you and I are both fascinated by light in very different ways. For me, it's light as material presence and just
So you had to work on that one all together, right?
altogether.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
That's a polyptych. I guess a quintyptych. No, they have to be, I mean, within such narrow parameters that my work exists in, my process, there is so much difference. I don't even know how to account for it. Like if I make one drawing at one time and then try to make a companion piece for it, it's like the values aren't the same. The color of the pencil isn't the same, even though it's just lead pencil or
Oh.
graphite pencil.
Yeah. Graphite. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The texture of the paper's not the same if it didn't come from the same roll. So it's all these really just subtle differences that again affect your body. They play
Yeah.
on,
Yeah.
and that you're not aware of consciously.
I'd
Oh,
be
and
curious, yeah, to see these, because there's this phenomena maybe you've seen on kind of social media where some artist takes a photograph and does the photorealistic um, graphite drawing of it.
really?
Yeah, so it's like basically a photograph. But then they say, oh, I took 3 months and like 50 pencils. And we talk about this because it's like, well, that's amazing that you did that. But then it's like, why? Why do that? Why not just have the photo? but your drawings probably take the same number of pencils in a long time, but it's not the photograph. So I don't think you have that question, like why do the drawing? Because the drawing is that experience. But
Oh no, I do have that question. A student once said, "Why don't you just do it in Photoshop and use the gradient tool?"
yeah.
And I
Uh,
was like, "Well, thank you. That is a very good question." Um, I tell her, "Well, there is actually reason. If I did this in Photoshop using gradient tool and I hung this big thing on the wall, this big print, you would have a different physical response
yeah,
to it, I
yeah,
guarantee."
yeah,
Because a
yeah,
lot of it is being transmitted, unconsciously. And there's a lot of it is just the physicality of the thing, the fact that you can see the little strokes.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, I do get that.
yeah. I mean, it is funny. They're successful because they work both. Like again, I've never seen those in person, but knowing, right, that they're this big and they're made out of graphite, like yes, I can be there with you with all that with all the pencils.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, because you can imagine. Yeah, and that's another thing is people always want to know how long they take to make,
yeah.
and as
Do you
if
say do you say 40 odd years or whatever? Picasso
oh
says,
I'm 56, but yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
that many years.
Yeah. When do I start? When does the drawing start? I mean, go back. But yeah, they want to know the number of hours doing the pencil, and I understand. I think that's a lot of people, again, with a non-art background, a lot of people with an art background can't appreciate it until they know that there's a lot of skill and a lot of work.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
um, I that's again that's something. That's a misconception. I started off by, giving a list of the reasons that people tend to dislike abstract art, and that was one of them, that it doesn't require skill or
Yeah,
effort,
yeah.
that it's easy. And you know, first of all,
Yeah, I do think, I mean, you're talking about other, if, or other things about this subject. I think there are so many different types of abstraction nowadays, that it is sort of hard to generalize. Like back to that music example, I think there is music that, yeah, you copy and paste and you sample and like it moves you. But then there's other stuff like that you really need to be a great cellist to like really appreciate. And I don't know, if you're not that conversant with like what a great cellist is, maybe you're not going to appreciate it. But or if you're not that understanding about what it takes to do a drawing with that kind of regularity, precision, and kind of control, then I don't know, maybe that's not your cup of tea, but for
yeah,
those that it is, like that's great, like it's amazing. But
that's another thing. I mean, I think we're nearing the end here, but I think that's a one good thing to note at the end is that there's so many kinds of abstraction.
yeah,
So many, as we've seen in these presentations. And some of it is just not going to speak to you. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. You don't have to feel like, oh, I just don't get it. There's something that I'm not understanding, you
yeah,
know? Like, a piece of instrumental music. If you don't like it, you don't like it. It's not, you're not missing it.
yeah, yeah,
In general, I tell people just to trust their responses, and you know stop thinking about interpretation so much and just experience
yeah,
it with the
yeah,
instrument of your body. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think that's good advice. It is, or I don't want to talk about this too much, but the idea of the value of these things does throw people off too, because it's such an upside down system. People understand like successful musicians or successful actors, it's because a lot of people give like a little bit of money to support them and they become successful. But with artists, it's reversed. A lot of, a few people give a lot of money, you know, to kind of help an artist sort of get into museums or, become successful. So people are a little bit divorced from that. Like they're like, I'm not voting for this because I can't afford, six figures for artwork or something like that. But so it's like, where's the criteria for judgment? But
Yeah, that's
if
such
you
a good,
kind of ignore that, then I don't know. But then I think your advice, like just go in there and make your opinion, right? Or feel whatever, trust yourself is good. But
yeah, just experience it. But yeah, the whole money thing. I mean, yeah, it's obscene and it does affect how people experience and judge work. Um, yeah, that's too bad. People ask me, "Oh, did you hear this, or that?" Or Picasso sold for 58 million
yeah,
today. What do you think? I'm like, it disgusts me. I don't.
yeah,
No work of art is worth that much money. Just don't even talk about it with me.
yeah. That's how it gets into the public, is like with those kind of extremes. Either it's a problem or else like some obscene economic like event. But
Yeah. Well, I just feel like I have taken up so much of your time, and but this has really been fun, Paul. I really appreciate this conversation.
yeah, no, I'm really happy you're doing it because it is that sense of like, teaching for a long time and talking about these things and caring about them, and then it sort of goes into the ether with each kind of group. But so it's nice to have conversation on a different mediums that other people can access. So
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will appreciate this
yeah,
conversation. Yeah. Um, so thank you so much.
yeah.
And
All right, great seeing you.
yeah, you too. You too.